The moment my boyfriend made me choose between him and my family, I helped him pack. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 31 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I believed the hardest part of a serious relationship was learning how to compromise. I was wrong. There comes a point when compromise stops looking like love and starts looking like losing yourself. If you'd asked me 6 months earlier whether my boyfriend and my mother got along, I would have smiled and said they were still adjusting to each other. The truth was far less comforting. For nearly 3 years, I'd been the only person trying to keep the peace, constantly smoothing over conflicts that should never have existed. I bought my apartment 5 years before I met Ethan Carter. It wasn't fancy, but every mortgage payment, late-night overtime shift, and small sacrifice made it something I was deeply proud of. When Ethan moved in 18 months earlier, he contributed $600 a month toward the household expenses. It wasn't much compared to the actual cost of living there, but I never cared because I believed we were building a future together. The real problem was never money. It was my mother. Margaret Bennett was 58, a widow who had spent 6 years rebuilding her life after losing my father to cancer. She was thoughtful to a fault, always texting before visiting, never staying too long, and somehow arriving with homemade food every single time. She respected our space so much that she often cut visits short if she thought we already had plans. Ethan saw something completely different. He complained that she visited too often, called too much, and always had something to say. In reality, too often meant a couple of phone calls a week and a visit about once a month. At first, I convinced myself they simply needed more time to adjust, so I kept trying to keep the peace. For a moment, I simply looked at him, and every compromise I'd made over the previous 3 years came rushing back. I'd skipped holidays, shortened visits with my mom, ignored her calls, and kept convincing myself that giving up one more small piece of my life would somehow make things better. Instead, every compromise had taught Ethan the same lesson. If he pushed hard enough, I'd eventually give in. I just didn't realize it until the day everything finally fell apart. I'd been sick with a miserable cold for 3 days when my mom texted around noon. Made a chicken soup. Can I drop some off? Only if you're awake. Despite my pounding headache, I smiled and told her to come over. 20 minutes later, she arrived with homemade soup and fresh bread from the bakery near her house. She checked my temperature, fussed over me like she always did, and stayed less than an hour. Ethan was perfectly pleasant the entire time, thanking her for the soup, asking about her garden, and even joking that one day she'd have to teach him the recipe. Watching them laugh together, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the tension between them. Before leaving, Mom hugged me and whispered, "I hope you feel better, sweetheart. Don't let anyone stress you out." "I won't," I promised. She smiled at Ethan. "Take good care of her." "I will." The apartment stayed quiet until the elevator doors closed. Then Ethan turned toward me. "Did you hear what she said?" I frowned. "She told me not to let anyone stress me out." "She was talking about me." I stared at him, genuinely confused. "No, she wasn't. She looked right at me." "I think you're reading too much into it." His expression hardened immediately. "Of course you'd say that." I rubbed my temples, already recognizing where this conversation was headed. "This isn't just about today," he said. "Last month she asked if I was happy. At dinner she joked that I had too many opinions about your schedule. She keeps making little comments because she doesn't respect me." I shook my head. "She asked a normal question and made a harmless joke. You're turning ordinary conversations into something they were never meant to be. You always defend her." "There aren't sides, Ethan." "There are." "No," I replied quietly. "There's reality." He let out a frustrated laugh before accusing me of refusing to admit what was obvious to him. "My mother brought me soup because I'm sick," I said. "That's all she did." "That's not the point." "Then what is?" "The point is that she keeps undermining me." I looked at him for a long moment before answering. "I don't think that's happening. I think you've convinced yourself it is." His jaw tightened. "So your mother's always right?" "My mother isn't on trial." His voice rose, but mine stayed calm. We'd had versions of this argument too many times before, and I suddenly realized how exhausted I was from translating every conversation between the two people I cared about most. Then Ethan said the words that changed everything. "If your mother can't respect me, she needs to apologize." I blinked. "For what?" "For calling me controlling." "She never called you controlling." "She implied it." "No." "Yes." "No." His patience snapped. "Fine." He pointed toward the front door. "Either your mother apologizes to me, or I'm leaving." I waited confidently, certain I'd panic and choose him like I always had. Instead, I looked at him, remembering every holiday I'd shortened, every phone call I'd ignored, and every small piece of my relationship with Mom that I'd sacrificed just to keep the peace. Only then did I understand that none of those compromises had ever solved the problem. They'd simply encouraged him to ask for more. I nodded once. "Okay." His shoulders relaxed, convinced I'd finally chosen him. Then I quietly said, "I'll help you pack." The smile disappeared from his face. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Outside, children laughed somewhere in the courtyard while the refrigerator hummed softly in the kitchen. But inside the apartment, everything felt strangely still. As I looked at Ethan, memories from the past 3 years rushed back. Holidays I'd cut short, dinners I'd cancelled, phone calls from mom I'd ignored, and countless promises that I'd visit next weekend. Every compromise had seemed small at the time, yet together they'd slowly pulled me away from the people who mattered most. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped asking myself what I actually wanted. Ethan finally laughed, shaking his head as though I'd just made a joke. "Very funny." I didn't answer. Instead, I walked into the bedroom, pulled his old navy suitcase from the closet, and laid it on the bed. The faded airline tag was still attached to the handle, reminding me of the day he moved in and kissed my forehead after joking that one day we'd travel the world together. It was strange how quickly a good memory could lose its warmth. The sound of the zipper made him stop in the doorway. Claire, what are you doing?" I opened his dresser and calmly began folding his clothes into the suitcase. "You said you were leaving," I replied without looking up. "I'm helping." His confident expression faded into confusion. "No, I meant if your mom refuses to apologize." "She won't." "You don't know that." "I do." I folded another sweater before meeting his eyes. "My mother isn't apologizing for something she never did." He stared at me for a moment before trying another approach. "You could at least ask her." "I'm not asking my widowed mother to apologize because she brought me soup. That's not what this is about." "Then tell me what it is." Han hesitated before answering. "It's about respect." "I agree," I said. "But you've spent 3 years asking me to disrespect the person who's loved me my entire life." His eyes widened. "I never asked that." "You never had to say it out loud." I continued packing while he stood frozen beside the bed. The calmer I became, the more frustrated he sounded. "This is ridiculous. You don't end a relationship over one argument." I looked up. "This isn't one argument." He frowned. "What are you talking about? It's every Thanksgiving you wanted me to leave early. Every Christmas you wanted to spend away from my family. Every time mom called and you rolled your eyes before I even answered. Every visit you complained lasted too long. I just wanted time with you." "You already had time with me." "I wanted us. My family is part of my life, Ethan. It always will be." He dragged both hands through his hair. "This isn't fair." "No," I replied quietly. "It hasn't been." For the first time since the argument began, uncertainty crossed his face. He finally understood I wasn't trying to calm him down or negotiate another compromise. I was accepting the choice he'd given me. "Can we stop for a second?" he asked. I kept packing. I said something stupid. "I know. I didn't think you'd actually do this." His voice softened into something close to pleading. "I'm sorry." I zipped another packing cube before answering. "You've apologized before." Without another word, I picked up my phone and searched for a same-day moving company. His expression changed instantly. Claire, don't." I ignored him and called the first company on the list. "Good afternoon, Horizon Moving Services. How can I help you today?" "I'm looking for a same-day move." As the representative confirmed they had an opening that afternoon, Ethan's face drained of color. "You can't be serious." "You said you were leaving," I replied calmly. "I'm simply helping." I wasn't serious. "I am." He begged me to hang up, but I confirmed the address, answered every question, paid for the booking, and ended the call. The apartment fell silent. "They're really coming?" "Yes." "You actually hired movers?" "Yes." He stared at me as if he no longer recognized the woman standing in front of him. "I can't believe you're doing this." I met his eyes. "I can't believe you thought I'd choose anyone over my mother after everything she's done for me." Tears filled his eyes. "I've given you 3 years. So have I. I love you." "I know." "Then why?" I looked around the bedroom we'd built together before answering. "Because love doesn't ask someone to abandon their family just to prove it." Hank shook his head. "I never wanted that." "Maybe not all at once," I said quietly. "But you wanted it one compromise at a time." Neither of us spoke again. Less than 2 hours later, the moving truck pulled into the parking lot. 3 firm knocks echoed through the apartment, and the movers stepped inside with the calm professionalism of people who had seen every kind of breakup imaginable. They worked quickly, while Ethan watched in disbelief, still hoping I'd change my mind. "Claire, please." I kept sealing boxes. "We can talk tomorrow." "We're talking now." Finally, he whispered, "I'll apologize to your mom." I looked up. "For what?" He opened his mouth, searching for an answer that never came. I don't know. There had never been anything to apologize for. He simply wanted someone to admit he was right, even when he wasn't. The movers carried box after box through the front door, and with each trip another piece of our shared life disappeared. The coffee machine we'd chosen together, the bookshelf we'd spent an entire Saturday assembling, and countless ordinary things suddenly became reminders of a future that no longer existed. By early evening, the apartment was almost empty. Ethan stood near the doorway, looking around in disbelief. "It's really over," I nodded. "It ended long before today. You just didn't see it." Han gave a hollow laugh. "So that's it?" "Yes. You don't even seem upset." I held his gaze. "I've been grieving this relationship for a long time." For the first time that afternoon, he had no response. He silently signed the moving paperwork while the last boxes disappeared into the truck, then stood at the doorway, staring around the apartment as though he no longer recognized it. "Where am I supposed to go?" "You told me your sister has a guest room." "That's temporary." "So is every new beginning." Hein looked at me for a long moment before shaking his head. "I can't believe you'd throw away 3 years." "No," I replied quietly. "You threw them away the moment you asked me to choose between you and my mother." He opened his mouth as if another argument might change everything, but nothing came. Finally, he picked up his suitcase and stepped into the hallway. "This is a mistake," he said. "You'll regret it." "I honestly hope I don't." The elevator doors closed, and with them the constant tension I'd been carrying for years. For the first time in a long while, my apartment felt peaceful instead of lonely, and I realized how exhausting it had become to measure every phone call, every family dinner, and every visit against Ethan's approval. 4 days later, I finally called my mom. She answered almost immediately. "Hi, sweetheart." The warmth in her voice disappeared the moment she heard mine. "Claire, what's wrong?" "I need to tell you something." By the time I finished explaining the breakup, she was quietly crying. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. I frowned. "Why are you apologizing?" If I hadn't joked about his schedule that day, I gently stopped her. "Mom, you didn't do anything wrong." I should have kept my mouth shut. "You made an innocent comment." Ethan chose to turn it into something else. She stayed silent, so I continued. "For 3 years, you've been changing your own behavior because you were afraid of causing problems. You started texting instead of calling, waited for invitations before visiting, and kept every visit shorter than you wanted. I never wanted to come between you." "You never did." Her voice broke. "I just wanted you to be happy." "I know." I took a slow breath before finally saying what I'd never admitted, even to myself. "You were never the one asking me to choose." Mom was quiet for a long moment before whispering, "I'm sorry you carried all of that alone." "So am I." When the call ended, I realized something that had been painfully obvious all along. I hadn't spent 3 years protecting Ethan or my mother. I had been protecting a relationship that was quietly falling apart while sacrificing the people who loved me most to keep it alive. The backlash started almost immediately. Ethan's sister left an angry voicemail accusing me of throwing him out with nowhere to go. His mother called later that day, insisting I'd always chosen my family over her son. "He told me to choose between him and my mother," I replied. "Because your mother never respected him." "My mother brought me soup." "That's not what Ethan said." "I'm sure it isn't." "She insisted that a good girlfriend should always put her partner first. A good partner doesn't earn first place by pushing everyone else out of your life," I said before ending the conversation. Within a few days, mutual friends began reaching out after hearing Ethan's version of the breakup. Most simply asked whether everything was okay. But Daniel, someone we'd both known for years, sent a different message. "I feel like there's more to this." Instead of arguing, I sent him screenshots from months of conversations, Ethan complaining about my mother's visits, asking me to skip holidays, questioning every phone call, and telling me that if I truly loved him, I'd stop choosing her. 20 minutes later, Daniel replied, "I had no idea." Nobody did. After that, he never questioned me again. I hoped the worst was finally behind me. I was wrong. The next morning, while I was at work, my Ring camera sent a motion alert. I opened the live feed and froze. Ethan was standing outside my apartment door. He glanced down the hallway, reached into his pocket, pulled out a key I didn't know existed, and calmly let himself inside. My co-workers faded into the background as I watched the screen in disbelief. Ethan didn't hesitate or look nervous. He moved through the apartment with purpose until he reached my filing cabinet and started searching through my mortgage and property records. I immediately called my sister Emily and sent her the live feed. "What the hell?" she blurted out. "He copied your key." I never gave him permission. "Call the police." "I want to see what he's doing first." He flipped through page after page before grabbing the folder with my property records. "What is he looking for?" Emily asked. Then it hit me. Months earlier, Ethan had casually suggested adding his name to the apartment. "Maybe we should put both our names on it someday." "After we're married," I'd laughed. "Why wait?" "Because it's my apartment." At the time, I'd believed Ethan had dropped the conversation about putting his name on the apartment. Watching him search through my mortgage records, I realised he never had. "He isn't looking for money," I whispered. Emily didn't hesitate. "He's trying to prove the apartment belongs to both of you." I nodded. "He thinks living here gave him some kind of legal claim." I was wrong. Every mortgage payment, every signature, and every ownership document had always been in my name. The camera showed Ethan sitting on the couch with his face buried in his hands. He stayed there for nearly 20 minutes before quietly gathering the few kitchen items that actually belonged to him and leaving as if nothing he'd done was illegal. The moment I got home, I called a locksmith. "I need every lock changed tonight. It'll cost extra." "I don't care." By 8 o'clock, every lock had been replaced. Watching the final deadbolt click into place wasn't just about securing the apartment. It felt like closing the last door Ethan believed he still had into my life. The following morning, I downloaded every second of the Ring footage and saved copies to my laptop, cloud storage, and a USB drive. If this situation escalated, I wanted evidence, not competing stories. Emily came over later that afternoon. As we reviewed the recording together, she paused the video the moment Ethan reached for my mortgage file. He knew exactly what he was looking for. I think so. I wasn't looking around for old memories. I was looking for ownership. Before I could respond, my phone rang. "Claire Bennett?" "Yes. This is attorney Michael Harris. I represent Ethan Carter." I switched the call to speaker as he explained that Ethan believed his financial contributions during the 18 months he lived with me gave him an interest in the apartment and that they hoped to reach an amicable settlement before pursuing legal action. I almost laughed. "He paid shared living expenses," I replied. "Nothing more." "I understand your position," the attorney said politely. "I'll have my lawyer contact you." There was a brief pause before he thanked me and ended the call. Emily stared at me. "He actually hired a lawyer." I guess he really believed the apartment should have been his. Looking back, everything suddenly made sense. His questions about refinancing, comments about building equity together, and curiosity. Every time a mortgage statement arrived hadn't been casual conversations. He'd been imagining a future where my apartment eventually became ours, and when that future disappeared, he started searching for another way to claim it. I immediately contacted a college friend who specialized in real estate law and sent him the attorney's letter, my mortgage records, and the Ring footage. He called less than an hour later. "Claire," he said with a quiet laugh, "this is one of the weakest property claims I've seen in years." The following morning, he walked me through everything in detail. The apartment had been purchased years before Ethan moved in. Every legal document was solely in my name, and his monthly transfers were clearly labelled as rent, utilities, or shared household expenses. I wasn't paying toward ownership, my attorney explained. He was simply paying to live there. He, who also confirmed we had never been married, had no cohabitation agreement, no jointly owned accounts connected to the property, and no renovations Ethan had financed. From a legal standpoint, there was nothing supporting his claim. "Claire, this letter wasn't written because he has a strong case," my attorney said. "It was written because they hoped the legal language would scare you into settling." For the first time since receiving Ethan's lawyer's letter, I felt the weight lift from my chest. So what happens now? I answer with facts. That afternoon, he emailed me a copy of his response before sending it. Every claim Ethan's attorney had made was answered with documentation, and the final paragraph made our position unmistakably clear. It noted that we possessed video evidence showing Ethan entering my apartment without permission after moving out, and warned that any further unauthorized entry or contact would result in legal action. 3 days passed without a reply. Instead of another letter, Ethan showed up at my office. The receptionist called just after lunch. "There's a man downstairs asking for you. He says he's your boyfriend." "My ex-boyfriend," I corrected. "Please ask him to leave." A minute later, she called back. Refusing. "Then call security." I stayed at my desk. Part of me wanted answers, but I finally understood that not every conversation deserved another chance. Within minutes, security escorted him out of the building. The receptionist later confirmed the incident had been documented, and my department manager stopped by to make sure I felt safe. "If you need a different parking space or someone to walk you to your car after work, just let us know," he said. His kindness caught me off guard because there was no guilt, no pressure, and no expectation that I should fix someone else's emotions before my own. It reminded me how healthy support was supposed to feel. The legal threats faded almost as quickly as they had appeared. Ethan's attorney sent one final letter suggesting an informal settlement to avoid further conflict, but my attorney responded with property records, mortgage statements, the Ring footage, and a clear explanation of why Ethan had no ownership interest in my apartment. That ended everything. There was no lawsuit, no courtroom battle, and no follow-up from his attorney. A mutual friend later told me Ethan had been advised to drop the case because he had no realistic chance of winning. I wasn't surprised. You can't build a legal claim on wishful thinking. His family, however, refused to let it go. His mother left another voicemail accusing me of ruining Ethan's future. His sister sent a long message blaming me for everything, and his father emailed asking how I could repay his son this way after everything he'd done for me. I ignored every one of them. Months earlier, I would have spent hours trying to explain myself, hoping the right words would change their minds. This time I understood something different. People determined to believe one version of the story rarely change because of another explanation. I stopped defending myself and let silence do what explanations never could. The following Sunday, Mom came over for dinner carrying a pot roast, insisting she'd cooked too much as usual. We laughed, shared a quiet meal, and spent the evening talking about everything except the breakup, my dad's terrible sense of direction, the stray cat that kept visiting her porch, and childhood stories we'd both memorized years ago, but somehow never grew tired of. Halfway through an old movie, I noticed she'd fallen asleep on the couch beneath the blanket I'd given her. Instead of feeling the emptiness Ethan had left behind, I realized the apartment finally felt like home again. It wasn't quieter because someone was missing. It was peaceful because I no longer had to measure every conversation or family visit against someone else's approval. Before leaving, Mom hugged me tightly. "I'm sorry you went through all of this. So am I." She smiled through damp eyes. "But I'm not sorry you're free." Her words stayed with me long after she walked out the door. I'd spent months believing I was mourning the end of a relationship, when in reality I was finally getting my own life back. Over the next few weeks, everything gradually settled. The legal threats disappeared, Ethan stopped trying to contact me, and for the first time in years, there wasn't another argument waiting around the corner. With the constant pressure finally gone, I returned to therapy. After listening to everything that had happened, my therapist asked a simple question. "When Ethan gave you that ultimatum, what did you feel first?" "Relief. Relief. I finally stopped trying to save something that had already been broken." She nodded. People who use ultimatums usually aren't expecting them to be accepted. They're testing how much control they still have. I immediately thought back to Ethan's expression when I pulled his suitcase out of the closet. Looking back, I realized he'd never imagined I'd actually call his bluff. "When you hired those movers," my therapist had said, "you didn't just end an argument, you ended a pattern." She was right. Looking back, none of Ethan's requests had sounded unreasonable on their own. Asking me to answer fewer calls, shorten family visits, or spend holidays differently always came wrapped in what seemed like a reasonable explanation. It was only after stepping away that I realized each compromise had quietly isolated me until almost every important relationship in my life revolved around keeping him happy. If I'd asked my mother to apologize that afternoon, there would have been another apology later, another compromise after that, and eventually another piece of my family slipping away. The ultimatum wasn't the beginning of our problems, it was simply the moment I finally recognized them. The following weekend, Mom brought chicken soup again, and we spent the evening on the balcony watching the sunset settle over the city. "I keep wondering if I could have done something differently," she admitted. I shook my head. "You already did. How?" "By showing me what healthy love looks like." She smiled, then repeated something my father used to say whenever life became complicated. "How someone treats your family is eventually how they'll treat you." I smiled back. I think he would have been right. The next afternoon, Emily stopped by for coffee. As we rearranged the living room and hung family photos I'd taken down years earlier, because Ethan thought they made the apartment feel crowded, she looked around and smiled. "This place feels different. It finally feels like mine again." Today my mother calls whenever she wants. Sometimes she comes over for dinner, sometimes she drops off soup, and sometimes we simply sit together on the balcony as the sun goes down. One evening my phone rang. "Hi sweetheart," Mom said. "Hi Mom." "Busy?" I smiled as warm light poured through the open window. "Not anymore." It took losing that relationship to finally understand something I'd been missing all along. The people who truly love you never ask